Cum clauses 2, so waited skipily, and welcome to our second video about the subjunctive. We are still only talking about subjunctive in reference to cum clauses. I, in particular, today want to talk about the imperfect subjunctive and sequence of tenses. So let's get started. Objectiva. I can explain when the subjunctive is used with cum. Okay, we should get that from the last video. I can recognize the subjunctive in Latin sentences. Okay, that should be implicit from the last video. I can conjugate verbs in the imperfect subjunctive, so we're getting a second tense. I can translate sentences using the imperfect subjunctive in cum clauses. And then I have this one starred. There's a little asterisk there because this is actually a really fairly difficult concept. It can help you translate, it can help you translate from Latin to English, but more so it helps from English to Latin. So if you don't fully get this, your mastery skill is really this one. This is like your ninja skill, okay? So basically, don't stress out too much. It's a pretty tough concept. So we know that cum uses a subjunctive in a circumstantial clause. That means there is a general set of circumstances, and that general set of circumstances causes the main clause to happen. So the cum clause, though, which comes before the main clause, right, is translated as when. So when this happens, the set of circumstances, then this thing happens, right? So here are the examples I used last time, but now I've given the subjunctive as the imperfect. So when the gladiators killed the lion, the spectators applauded. Notice now I'm not using the word had. Last time we had pluperfect, so I used the word had. This time it's just when the gladiators killed the lion. Let's look at the next one. Cum dominus. When the master gave these orders, haec mandata, these orders, the craftsman returned to the palace. Notice again that I used gave, so a simple past tense. You could also say when the master was giving these orders, when the master used to give these orders. So let's talk specifically about the imperfect. So the imperfect tense as subjunctive used in a circumstantial cum clause, how am I going to translate it? Well, it should be paired, when you see it, it should be paired with a perfect or imperfect tense verb in the main clause. And this indicates that the action is at the same time or after the verb in the main clause. So let's flip back. When the master gave these orders, the craftsman returned to the city. Those things happened in the same general time if we looked at a timeline. Before, when we were looking at pluperfect, right, it's like back here, whereas our main verb, which was in the perfect or imperfect, was here, right? All still in the past somewhere, but pluperfect always indicates action before the other verb, whereas imperfect indicates action that's occurring while a perfect tense verb is going on or while another imperfect tense verb is going on. So that's why we don't use had anymore. Instead, when we translate, we use was giving or gave, right? Was killing in the gladiator sentence, or killed, or any other imperfect translation. Remember, we also had We also have, with imperfect, we also have began to and used to, and we can use those as well, kept on. So what it looks like, well, when you make the imperfect subjunctive, you basically take the infinitive, or the second part of the verb, and you add endings to it. You add the endings M-S-T, M-U-S, T-I-S, and N-T. Look at amo amare. It's just the infinitive with normal person present tense kind of endings going on. Right? That's all we've done. So if I were translating this, amarem would say, I was loving. Or amares would say, you were loving. Or amaret, he, she, or it was loving. Amaremos, we were loving. Amaretis, you all were loving. Amarent, they were loving. Or I used to love, or you used to love, or he used to love. You get the idea. It's just like regular imperfect tense. The same translations get to do the same thing, okay? It's just a different look, and it's been forced into being subjunctive because of a general set of circumstances in a relationship. Sequence of tenses, friends, is a little more difficult. So I'm going to flip us over to the internet for a second, and I want to talk about sequence of tenses in general. So sequence of tenses is basically mostly imperative to composing Latin sentences. So that's why I'm saying this is that ninja level of skill, being able to actually go from English to Latin. There are two sequences. There's what's called the primary sequence, and then there's also one that's called the historical or secondary sequence. I personally like calling it historical, but that's up to you. Either is fine. If you look at these in terms of what it really means, all the sequence of tenses does is show you that if the main verb, that's what MV stands for, okay, if the main clause verb is present, future, or future perfect, then the subjunctive verb will be perfect if we want it to happen before the main verb, or present if we want it to happen at the same time or after the main verb. We don't actually have anything in the primary sequence right now. These cum clauses we're seeing are in the secondary or historical sequence. So we've seen that our main verb, in both of my examples, if you look back at redierunt, right? If you look back at plauserunt, they were both perfect tense. In the first video, we saw that we wanted action before the main verb. So what's before perfect tense? Well, duh, pluperfect is before perfect tense. It's the past perfect. So to indicate that, Latin used the pluperfect. Now we're seeing that we don't want to use the translation of had anymore. We don't want that before the main verb kind of action in our cum clause. Instead, we want it at the same time. So we've used imperfect. Because in theory, imperfect and perfect can occur at the same time. So hence why now we're translating as was killing or used to kill, right? Or just killed. Or we have, maybe it's even a little bit after. More than likely same time for us. So let's return one more time to my examples. What this means in sequence of tenses is that essentially if the main clause has perfect tense or imperfect tense or pluperfect tense, you have what's called a secondary sequence. That means that the subordinate clause, or the cum clause, the circumstantial cum clause, that's guided by the general set of circumstances, or gives us the general set of circumstances, if we want to show that this action here, this general set of circumstances, was before the clapping, so to speak, then we would use pluperfect. If we wanted to say that it was at the same time as the clapping, that the killing and clapping are happening at the same time, or maybe it even happened right after, then we have to use imperfect. That's all it means. And really the biggest thing I need you to know is how to translate it. If you see pluperfect, use had, guys. If you see imperfect, use one of the imperfect translations. You have 5 ways. So I guess that's it. I know sequence of tenses is really confusing. We'll talk a little bit more about it in class. But the really important thing is that you know how to translate it and how to recognize it and what a circumstantial clause is. Walete.